Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today, despite our weather. Hoping there's a lot of people on Zoom today who decided to avoid the wind and the rain and wanted to hear something about dory fishing off the central Oregon coast. Would today be a good day to go dory fishing, do you think?
No, it would not. This would be a day to go to the coffee shop or
Yeah,
something like
or
that.
the
But
library to come and see
library would be a good,
see
yeah,
to see the author.
absolutely, yeah.
I'm Nancy McCarthy. I'm a volunteer here with the Cannon Beach Library, and we are the Northwest Authors Series Committee is sponsoring this presentation. Today we are talking to Terry Evers, who wrote a book called 15 Seasons. So let me give you a little introduction to Terry. In his memoir, 15 Seasons, author Terry Evers dedicates the book to his father, who, he says, took an enormous leap of faith that swept us away from the ordinary and opened the floodgates to the unimaginable. And so the adventure begins. When Bruce Evers, a textbook salesman in Salem, Oregon, buys a commercial dory boat and takes his 13-year-old son, can you imagine 13? 13-year-old son, Terry, out on the Pacific Ocean for a summer salmon fishing season. It's the first of 15 seasons when they learn that it takes more than a boat and fishing gear to become successful fishermen. When his dad invited Terry to fish with him the summer prior to Terry's high school freshman year in 1977, the boy jumped at the chance. Little did I know that it would open the door to other worldly adventures and forge a unique relationship with my father that would run deeper than I ever imagined, Terry writes. That initial trip launched them into experiences involving harrowing Pacific coast storms, battles with giant king salmon, and challenging fish runs that kept them either constantly working when the catch was great or bored when the catch dwindled. Throughout their 15 dory seasons on the central Oregon coast, they met a variety of fishermen and developed a love of the fishing culture from 1977 to 1992. 15 Seasons was featured in several newspapers, publications, and podcasts. Stories about the book appeared in National Fisherman Magazine, Pacific Fishing Magazine, the Outdoor GPS television show, Oregon Coast Magazine, and the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast. Terry has spent the past 33 years in education. He is a STEM teacher, which means science, technology, engineering, math, for elementary students. With his dory long gone, Terry now explores Oregon and Washington rivers, lakes, and bays in his picnic kayak. He and his wife, Deanne, live in Kaiser. They have 2 grown daughters and 2 granddaughters. Help me welcome Terry Evans.
First of all, thank you for having me here. This is an honor. I've always admired it. Online, I've seen Cannon Beach's dedication to literature and just reading, and it's just always been really impressive. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Nancy, for all your help in getting things going. I just excited to share a little bit about 15 seasons here. And so it's in short, book about the 15 years that my father and I commercial fished together in different configurations, and a few other tidbits along the way about the culture, about the people, and some other adventures that were in there mixed in. And this is our 22-foot dory out there, the Carolyn K. It's named after my mother and my sister. My mother's name's Carolyn and my sister's name is Kay, and that name is also spread throughout the family. The middle name Kay has been a popular one. So that's where they got its name. And it used to be named the Pisces before we got it. And so this whole idea came from the 15 years we fished. And I'll just start here, and I'll kind of go back into the writing a little later. But the up here, you'll see the logbooks I used to keep. Dad used to encourage me, you ought to write down, some of the adventures you do and stuff in these logbooks. And I just started doing that every day. I'd write down how many fish we caught and special events that happen, wind conditions, waves, and it kind of got me into learning more about things too. And so anyhow, I would keep those records, and we just had a stack of them. I'm not ever sure what we would do with them, other than maybe it's going to be handy at the time for looking back to know when to fish a certain area on a certain date and so forth. So anyhow, years went by. Dad had said, once there's a nice collection of, yeah, put that in a book someday. And I went, yeah. And so, I didn't write a lot when I was a young kid, but other than that, but in school a little bit. But years later, when I went to college, I really kind of relearned how to write, and just out of necessity, with your projects and things like that. But I did that, and I started getting more confidence in it. And then with my students, I have taught elementary for 34 years now, and I did a homeroom class, and so I taught it kind of everything for years. And I'd write along with my students with whether it be narrative, persuasive, imaginative, expository writing, whatever it might be. And so I would write something as an examples with my students, and I especially with anything descriptive and narrative, I really got into it, and so I really enjoyed that process of it. And I noticed that I started to improve. Is when you teach anything and you start learning new strategies to teach it, you start to improve with it. And I really got into it. And so, long story short, Deanne encouraged me. She said, "Yeah, you ought to put that in a book." And I said, "I don't know what to do with it or where to start." And so by the, this is 2018, and I've been kayaking a lot. Kind of that's my thing now. And so I was reading some kayaking adventure books, and a guy that has written a couple books about kayaking, like around Ireland and New Zealand and all these amazing adventures. And so I then contacted him up in Port Angeles, and I got a hold of him, and I just said, "Honey, how did you get started?" And he goes, "Just start writing, and just like somebody sitting in your living room and you're telling the story, just start there and then see where it takes you." It's like, okay. So I had, some summer time. So I just started writing, and that went through the winter. And, I'd sit there. Sometimes I'd just be by myself, on the couch or something. And other times we'd be watching a Blazer game or just whatever, just typing a few paragraphs and revising. And I got 2 years down the line, and then that's where I got in with the publisher. And I'll talk about that a little later. But that's kind of where it came from, those fishing logs. And so that's where I put it all back together and started stitching it, and kind of jogged my memory and stuff I still remembered. And also corresponding with people that used to fish too. And I was able, thank goodness for the internet, I was able to do that and contact people, which was really rewarding. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my dad. This is the man who made it all happen, and I'll read a little bit out of here so you get to know him. But he took a leap of faith to do all this. And so he grew up in Bend, and he explored all the Cascade lakes, and he lived right if you've been in Bend before, if you know where Drake Park was, and there's some beautiful homes right along there. He used to live in one of those, and right across from the Deschutes River. And so he had access to all sorts of waterways, and it was different back then. It wasn't so busy. And so anyway, he went to Southern Oregon, and he university and for a teaching degree. And he had met my mom in high school, and so they and eventually got married when I was in when he was in college. And then went to Salem to get his first teaching job, and then he taught for about 4 years, and then he got into the textbook sales. He got in with a school textbook company and did that. And he had the summers off too, so it was really nice. This is where that fit in. It fit in really nicely to be able to do some commercial fishing. So I think it was page 12. Yeah. So I'd like to read a little bit about Dad. You get to know him a little bit. So Bruce Evers was born and raised in Bend, Oregon, which lies in central Oregon and resides just east of the majestic Cascade Range. Bend used to be a small, sleepy logging town, but now sports a population over 100,000 and is a prime recreation destination in the Pacific Northwest. Based on the stories he told me about his youth, his adventures mirrored those of the boys in the classic film Stand By Me. There were many tales about his explorations that began from his two-story home across from Drake Park and the Deschutes River and led to endless ponderosa pines, mounds of lava rock, and miles of desert sagebrush. He took advantage of the many perks nature offered, including fishing the high lakes along Century Drive for mammoth rainbow trout that frequented the local waters. A beast on the offensive line for the Bend Lava Bears high school football team, Bruce had aspirations of playing at the collegiate level, but a knee injury put that dream to rest. He attended Southern Oregon College in Ashland, Oregon, and while attending, he married his high school sweetheart, Carolyn. A year later, I arrived on the scene, and we migrated to Salem after Dad scored his first teaching job. Dad was assigned to teach a rough and tumble sixth grade class in one of the town's most challenging environments. Many of those young learners were hard to handle for most teachers, but from what I gathered, Dad did an amazing job of keeping them engaged and on a good track. His rather imposing 6 foot 2 inch broad frame and deep voice probably didn't hurt to quell the most of rambunctious young souls. If that wasn't enough, he also moonlighted as a pizza artist at Shakey's. After 4 years of that torrid pace and a 1960s teacher salary, he jumped ship to the more financially lucrative education textbook sales business. And so that's where we ended up residing over in Northeast Salem at that point. And so he would go steelhead fishing and all these things. He bought a boat with a neighbor, a steelhead drift boat. And we started going trout fishing. He wanted to get me in on the action. So I still remember this trip. We went to Detroit Reservoir, if you're familiar with Detroit, and took me on a trout fishing trip. And I was all excited. And so we took off there for trout and loaded up with snacks, and that was pretty exciting. And so I'm going to read a little bit about my first episode, which had my dad's head scratching at the beginning of it. So when I was old enough, Dad couldn't wait to take me fishing. My first trip was to Detroit Reservoir, a large body of water an hour east of Salem. Donned with my bulky, blocky orange life jacket, I peered over the side of our battered rental boat as we motored away from the dock. Much to my father's surprise, I suddenly shouted out, "Dad, there are bears crawling on the bottom of the lake." "Bears? I don't see any bears, Tara," replied my puzzled father, who suppressed a laugh. "They're crawling everywhere and they're all under the boat," I emphatically shouted back. No, Tara, those are tree stumps. "There aren't any bears down there," Dad said, trying to de-escalate my fears 5 minutes into our outing. "I saw them moving, Dad. They're bears," I said, not letting go of the issue for a second. "Nah, it'll be all right. They won't bother us. So let's go catch some trout," Dad proclaimed assuredly as we motored into the deep water with bears disappearing from view. I was excited to catch my first fish, but I was equally amped to knock down one of the bottles of Orange Crush that Dad had stashed into the cooler. And we caught our limits by noon, and that led to many more memorable trips to Oregon lakes, rivers, saltwater, and even a trek with my Uncle Steve to a remote lake in British Columbia. Like a slow, steady drip, these rich experiences built a strong bond between us and life on the water. And so that was one of the beginning of many outings, and that eventually led to the saltwater explorations. So when we got into the fishing boat, there were some seeds that were planted along the way that I look back and there's just like a trail of breadcrumbs. And so it happened at the Embarcadero actually, and then later at Pacific City and Newport Dry Dock when we finally got our boat. But that was page 18. Little excerpt here of how this really got going. So our seeds sprouted on an August morning in 1975. Thick drizzle enveloped Yaquina Bay in Newport, Oregon, as my father and I were enjoying some crabbing off a hotel dock during our family vacation. As we pulled our crab rings, several boats heading out into the thick mist for a day of commercial salmon fishing caught my father's eye. Out of nowhere, Dad said, "Those are very seaworthy boats, Tara. They have flat bottoms and they're called dories, and they take them out on the ocean to catch salmon for a living." To be honest, the boats looked a bit decrepit to me as they were battle scarred and didn't have shiny fiberglass cabins like those that were still tied to the docks. A bit less enthusiastic, and perhaps with good reason, I replied, "The fishermen must get really wet and cold with no cabin." One of the fishermen passing by was hunched over at the helm, decked out in his wet forest green rain gear. Water was dripping down from his hood across his face as he half jokingly shouted, "I don't want to go." I still remember that. I could hear it. And so while I'm sure the drizzly wet guy would have enjoyed being warm and dry at the coffee shop, he didn't want to be anywhere else. Years later, that memory came back to me on a rainy coastal summer day, and a strange feeling crawled through my mind as I motored along the bayfront waters. In our own dory, I was struck with the realization that I was just like the guy fully donned in soaking wet rain gear, and some tourist on a dock was likely looking at me with a small amount of envy and some sort of wonder. I was kind of circled back there, and I remember just motoring along, go, "Oh yeah, that guy," and that was right, motoring right by that dock there, and so
Is that Pacific City or where?
that's in Newport. Yeah, at the Embarcadero dock. They have a little fishing dock there. We used to, as a family, visit and spend time. And so that eventually led to Pacific City. There's this section in the book that I talk about where we went and looked at boats again. And Dad was kind of, his interest was in increasing in this. I'm like, hey, you're really serious about this. That's kind of weird. And then eventually we found a boat, the Carolyn K. It was on dry dock up on some barrels. It was for sale in Newport. And so that boat had ties to people he knew in Bend, and kind of seemed like, okay, this makes sense. This is all kind of coming together. And so that's when he decided to go for it at that point. So just a little bit about the dory and how this all work with commercial fishing. It's all hand lined. It's just you don't have rod and reel. No nets involved or anything like that. And so anybody, if you ever see these boats with long poles out, if you're not familiar with the fishery, and it could be small boats, large boats, a little complicated when it gets how exactly everything connects. But the long story short of it is you have some 1/8 of 5/64 stainless steel cable that attached to lead balls all the way to 40 or 50 pounds. Ours are in the 30 to 40 range. They keep it down. And then off of that, you snap on different configurations of gear, just different salmon gear that you would use. And you drag that through the water. And then up there where it says spring or deep line spring, for example, these are hard springs. If you pull them, they're really difficult. So there's a lot of weight. And when a fish hits those, you see the spring bouncing. So it's kind of fun, just like your rod would bounce. And so and the spring would bounce according to the type of fish. So a big Chinook would be like bang, 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 and cohos kind of bounced all over. Other types of fish, you could kind of read it. After a while, you became a springologist, and you could, determine what kind of fish you had on just by how it was quivering. So we would either crank, in the early days, we would crank them up by hand. We were called hand crankers. You get a good workout. And then later on, we got hydraulic. They're called gerties and or winches, and so we got hydraulics when we didn't have to do so much exercise on that. And that's how you haul them aboard. And the poles are just to spread the gear. And we had a couple floats off the back that ran gear too. And our boat just had that little telephone booth console. It kind of made it unique at the time. Some of them didn't have the windshield, and just took a lot of weather in your face. So we were able to get a little bit out of the weather, not very much, but a little bit. So that's how that all worked. And so it's kind of a complicated thing to figure out in the beginning. So our first season was a steep learning curve. Dad had fished rivers. He's really good at catching steelhead, trout, and all those things. And so I'd go along with him. And so he was really a master at that. But the commercial fishing was all new, new area, new types of fishing, new people, the whole thing, to get used to that. So I remember he was asking a lot of questions. This is where we really got immersed into the culture of, you really got down on the bayfront and down on the docks with a whole different culture than just up on, in town. And so Dad was also, he was the textbook salesman from Salem, clean cut guy, and going down, and you got people from all walks of life, especially in the 70s, when kind of refugees from the 60s were kind of there. And he was intersecting with a lot of different personalities, and it was kind of interesting just to see that from young teenager's point of view. So that's what the boat looked like. I was 1977 picture, I believe, and right, a few months into it, I think. And so We got out on our first day and we got all the gear down. We kind of learned how to at least get it down. We had run out of the port and we had, Dad had befriended a people next to us that didn't know any more than we did, as it turned out. And so they said, hey, do you want to run together out? Yeah. And there's just, at the time, there's just boats pouring out. And we had like a 3-day delay because of the weather and stuff. And so we were anxious to get out fishing. So we go out and we go, where do, like back then we had a depth finder and a compass and a radio. And there's no, back then they had something called a RAN instead of GPS. And we didn't have that. So you're just out there. So you hope it doesn't get foggy, which it did sometimes. But anyway, so we go out and we head south somewhere. I don't know. We ran for about an hour out. And I think he saw some boats and we're like, well, let's put down here. If nothing else, we were just tired of running. And so put the gear down, and I think it's picture 6. So, yeah, so we just put the gear down just to see, what would happen here. I gotta find my page. There we go. So Dad, in his always optimistic, he always had a good feeling about today. So he, of course, said that. He says, I have a good feeling we're going to get into some fish soon here. And we were kind of trolling around and not getting anything for a while. And Dad said reassuringly, as he could tell, that I was getting impatient after an hour of no pandemonium. As Dad's impatience began to surface too, we noticed a few springs started to dance erratically on Dad's side. Dad, I think you really have a fish on your side this time. Look at the spring bounce around. I'll bet it's a big one, I shouted as the springs cowbells. We had bells on there. There's cowbells. Cling, clang, clang, clang. It's kind of fun. Clanked erratically. Take the helm, Tare. I'm going to take a look. Keep us going straight. And that was really important. Crowley, you didn't want to make really close turns on a dime because you get your gear tangled. Caught up in the euphoria of the moment, I chose instead to peer over his shoulder. This resulted in the boat gradually making a tight 360-degree turn due to the unequal leverage from pulling gear. While this was happening, I heard a splash over the hum of the engine. Hey, Dad, we have a fish on the meat line too, I said in an ant voice. Off the back of the boat, it was very common for people to put down what's called a meat line. It's just a line on a cord and a weight and a fishing lure off the back, and it just dangled in the prop wash. Had a lot of fish. So we had a fish on. This was a short section of cotton line attached to a 5-pound weight tied off on the transom that was dragging a lure, and it was all stretched out with a silver salmon on it. I'm busy right now. We have 2 or 3 fish on this wire, Dad shouted amidst the small frenzy. In my excited state, I abandoned my post and scrambled to the stern to pull the salmon aboard. This caused the boat to circle in even a tighter circumference. As Dad was in the process of pulling the silvers off his side, I clumsily landed the silver on the deck. Check it out, Dad, I got the fish, I triumphantly announced as Dad hoisted 2 more aboard. You need to straighten this boat out right now. We just made a tight circle. Shoot! I hope our gear isn't tangled under the boat. He was not pleased, Dad said in a tense and agitated tone. The ugly truth was that the float lines and the deep lines had been tangled in an unimaginable mess under the boat due to the tight turn. This was even more evident when we were unable to crank up our deep lines any further. Oh, damn. We have a big tangle under the boat. Oh, man, this is all my fault. I'm sorry, Dad. I just saw that silver on the meat line and thought I should get it aboard before it got away. How are we going to get it untangled? Well, we're going to find out. I think we're going to have to let out the wire on one side and bring it up on the other side. I'm going to shut down the engine. Let's get to work. There are some fish here, and I want to get the gear down again soon. And thus began our hour-long arduous process of untangling the massive bird's nest of stainless steel cable and monofilament line, which led to a lot of clipping, cutting, and retiring. And judging from the way Dad aggressively tossed the tangled hardware on the deck, I knew he was super pissed, but he was trying his best to keep composed. If there was an upside, it was that we pulled a few more silvers off the gear. A bit chagrined from the experience, we at least had time to reflect what had worked to catch our little clatter of silvers. So I learned my dad that, he could get a bit lit if things happened there. So that was kind of a tough start, and we found out the fishing season was not the best. The year before, 1976, was a banner season. Boats were filling, catching 100 a day sometimes. And but we had were coming up on like 0 fish days, 1 fish days, 5 fish days. And it turned out we weren't very good at it, but other people were struggling too. And so we struggled through that year, and the next year got a little bit better. By 1979, we started trying new gear, we got networked with new people, and we got a little bit better. And to the point where we started trying new techniques, and we were able to experience some more success. And there's a term called highliners, which means a highliner is somebody who really catches a lot of fish, real good fisherman. And all of a sudden, a few people started saying, "Hey, you're the highliners today." And we come to the dock, and on page 73, I have one where we pull up to the dock, and after a day's catching, "Hey, you're the highlining boat today." And so things were starting to come together, and we were learning, and I certainly learning not to make real tight turns anymore, and learning how to pull the gear in such a way that we didn't always get tangled. Sometimes it still would, just no matter what you did. Um, but we were starting to put all of that together. And the real cool thing too is we were starting to learn to work together. And I mentioned this several times, that we just kind of, this synchronicity, I guess, between us, within us, is just being able to know what to do, when to do it, what our jobs were in a certain moment, whether it was some disaster happening, or good things, when there's a lot of fish and those types of things. So kind of the well-oiled machine analogy that was starting to happen, and it was pretty cool. And we would be real competitive by on our sides. He had the port side, I had the starboard side, and so there's some competition between us too, especially when it got slow and we were trying to coax some fish. We call it scratch fishing, and trying to dig out some different strategies. We did get in a few arguments, about gear strategies a little later on, or how fast to troll, or where to go fishing. There were a few things there that we had some disagreements, but we all, for the most part, worked that out pretty well. And but different as I got older, I was getting to be more of a cocky teenager. I was like, I know best. My dad, what would he know? Right. Yeah. And so there's a little bit of that too. By 1980, Dad allowed me to go fishing. There was a couple instances where I got to go fish by myself, and then in the summer he had to go away. That summer he was with his textbook business. He had to do some conferences and some other work, but it didn't normally come up. So I started fishing solo. And I'd done that in actually 1979, the year before my junior year of high school, when my uncle was coming over to fish, and he actually had a car accident. So my dad went over to help him, and turned out he just said, "Why don't you just go fishing while I help him out?" And so I learned how to do that. But 1980, I was fishing, and so this was in about late July or August, and so I went out one day out to the place called the Rock Pile, which is an underwater reef, and it's still deep. It's anywhere from probably 120 to 200 something feet in deeper water there. And real popular place to fish. If you go to Newport, you'll hear about the Rock Pile a lot, and bottom fishing trips and stuff. So, but salmon was a good salmon place. So I went out there, and it was foggy weather. It was pretty calm, but it was really foggy. And so I put my gear down, and I caught a few Chinooks, and I was catching a few silvers, but not many. And so all of a sudden, I got a big fish on my spring. And so I was by myself this time. So this is the challenge that came up with me here. My summer solo tour began on a foggy morning. I nudged my Crime of the Century cassette by Supertramp into the tape deck and made my dark drive down to the docks. I was confident in my navigation skills, so I didn't hesitate to set a course on a flat ocean to the north end of the rock pile. With the Davies Hodgson pen melodies spinning on repeat in my head, I cruised at maximum RPMs to the work site. The morning's fishing turned out spotty at best, but I did put a few kings in the box. About mid-afternoon, I was shaken out of a spring watching trance as my port deep spring started pounding aggressively. There was little doubt that it was a monster king, and it was more than ready to go head to head with me. I suspected it had chomped down on our trusty Little Joe 120 plug. I let it soak as I was pulling the metal davit and cable from the depths, and I started cranking it up. Hang on there, big king. Whoa, this is a big pumper, I said aloud to myself as I felt it tug on the gritty handle. I brought the spread to the surface and noticed it had indeed taken the plug, which was on a very long leader that allowed for more stretch and shock absorption. The fish, in typical Chinook fashion, veered 90 degrees to the port side and gave me a look like, I dare you. All right, here we go. Come to the boat. Don't go crazy on me. No, no, not toward the prop wash, I yelled out to the fish. Managing the monofilament line in hand over hand fashion, I kept it over the side rail and out of the prop. I leaped over the extra gas can and met the fish on the starboard side as we continued our battle. Okay, so you want to do battle on the starboard side. That's fine. I continued my dialogue. Oh, stay away from the prop, I said as I leaped over the gas can again and back to the port side. I'm bringing you aboard. After one more surge, my foe started wearing out. Noticing its pause, I made my move, handlined it to the boat, gaffed it, and plopped it on the deck. It was without a doubt the largest salmon we had ever brought aboard. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I cried out. Talk about an endorphin rush. I forgot who I hailed on the CB, but I was so hyped I had to tell someone as I was nearly hyperventilating with a soprano voice. With only one deep line in the water during the ensuing battle, the boat had been making several wide circles in some sort of open space away from the other boats. I was literally shaking for several minutes as I put the gear back down. A couple more nice-sized kings came aboard that day, but they were nothing compared to the fish that weighed and dressed out at 29 pounds. The glory concluded that foggy evening when I delivered my catch to the fish company amongst a chorus of oohs and ahs. So that was pretty exciting for an 18-year-old to do that all by herself, But yeah, pretty cool. So that's some of the solo fishing I was doing. Whoops, I just put it on mute. There we go. So just the dory fleet, it was most of the people fished during the summer. There was a few people that fished year round. They work on a crab boat or had their own boat and some other configuration. But there were truck drivers, teachers, electricians, pharmacists, you name it on this list here of people that came from all walks of life. And it was just fascinating intersection of people. And it just was like in June or July of people coming out of the woodwork and just kind of emerging one by one, and they'd all be there. And that was pretty exciting to have that happen. And you'd always look forward to these people coming and hoping they would come back. Some people never did. And you wonder where did they go? Try to find out. But and some people would emerge one year, but then come back again, or with a different boat. It was just fascinating, but it was just the people in this industry that really, when I round it down, not only to the fishing, it was really what I look for. These were my rock stars, my superheroes, as it turned out, because this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this forever, and at least in the summer, and then probably fish in the winter. And that's what I decided. I had no aspirations for college at that time, which people asked me a lot, and I was like, I don't want to do this. And so that was my goal, is to definitely, build a super dory and be like these guys, not realizing we already had a great dory, but if Dad kept doing that, we could do it as a duo of two boats and something like that. So, but yeah, these people. And so the cool thing is that as I went through the process of writing this book, I needed to go try to reach out to these people. And I think for the glory of the internet, for being able to do that, I reached out to a dozen or more people, I think, in a number of ways. And a couple times I actually hand wrote some letters. I got found an address and hoped and prayed that it would get there. And a few of them did. And so I kind of went old school on that, but it was really cool because Dad also looked up to these people too. We would talk about this all winter when we weren't fishing, and he would just go wax on and on about these people. And it was really cool. And so I'm a little emotional on this, but it was really cool to know that Dad would know that I communicated with Tom or Terry or some of these other people up here. It was pretty cool, and he would just be smiling from ear to ear, knowing that we were able to connect again. after all those years. So that was pretty cool. I keep hitting mute. I do this at school all the time. I hit mute sometimes because when we transition for something else. So the other aspect of this is I mark my life with music. Ever since I was about middle school, I started listening to music, and there are just pieces of music that I enjoyed that absolutely are etched in my DNA. I can tell you exactly, and maybe without or any people have all sorts of things that you identify with, and where you were at that time. And so as the music became that, it was kind of an organic process. And so I was going to read you about Paul McCartney's silly love songs. Fleetwood Mac was a big one too, but it kind of goes back before we got the boat. This is one of those seeds that began it all. And it had to do with silly love. And I play that song, and I just still, even after writing this and everything, it's just, I'm back. I can't help it. But so it's fascinating how memories are entwined with the five senses. A certain song or scent instantly imprints strong emotions in your mind, and bam, the experience is in permanent recall forever. This was certainly the case after going on a charter bottom fishing trip with my father in the spring of 1976. This was a year before we got the boat. The ocean was an agitated mess, much like a washing machine, while fishing about 13 miles offshore on a windy, drizzly spring day. We successfully avoided seasickness and amassed a cooler full of lingcod and rockfish fillets. Before making the 2-hour drive back home with our catch, we decided to refuel our chilled souls at a pizza joint along Highway 101 in Newport. It was a typical local 1970s establishment, complete with pool tables, groovy dim stained glass hanging lamps, dark decor, a jukebox cranking out the greatest hits in the smoky interior. While I was enjoying my Pepsi and slices of Canadian bacon, silly love songs by Paul McCartney saturated my eardrums. The blustery day on the salt resonated with me on another level. The rhythm of the waves, the boat's marine radio chatter in the background, the bitter taste of the salty air, the toxic engine exhaust fumes, and lastly, McCartney and a few slices of pizza tugged on my heart like never had before. I had the taste of something big and alluring, and I wanted more. And as I felt this metamorphosis take its grip on the ride home, it left me wondering about my father. Did he feel this way too? And so there were other instances where we had uh, things going on, and there's just some song, and so it would be kind of came naturally, and almost then I kind of look forward to it, is that there would just be some music that would be happening at the time that seemed to fit the whole culture and the vibe in some way. It just fused, and so there's just, and what I did in the book is created a sound list. It's a soundtrack, so each chapter is a soundtrack of what was kind of going through my head and how it felt and what fit. And this kind of came about when I was writing, and I was kind of including some of that. And then at Dancing Moon Press, with the publisher Kim, she said, you really, this is an important part of your book, isn't it? And I go, well, yeah, it seemed to flow out. So she said, why don't you include a set list of what was really happening at that time? That would be kind of a cool thing. So every chapter starts with a set list of kind of what was circulating through my mind. And there's just certain things that fit, and there's others that didn't too, but those are some. But there's just, it goes on and on and on. That was a really fun part to write about. Then I was like, okay. Then I forgot some too after it was published. I forget that. I was like, do another edition and go back and include them. But I was like, gosh, yeah, how did I forget that? So midway through, about 1981, 85 is when it was. The fishing season started to decline a little bit. Still going on, but they were declining a little bit. But then I had to make a good decision, and I wasn't going to go to college. I was just not in an academic state of mind whatsoever at that point, and I wanted to do full-time fishing when I was 18, graduated, and it was kind of like, well, I could go on a crab boat. I was a little intimidated by it. It was just you could end up on a really good boat, or you can be in a bad situation. Being a teenager, I was a little aware enough to know that I could get, it might not be a good thing. So for me, And so anyway, Dad started urging me maybe the Coast Guard. So long story short is that after some discussion, some arguments, some all sorts of things, I was like, you're right. Yeah, I need some direction. So I went in the Coast Guard, and my biggest worry was I'd never get to fish again, and that was a big concern. But as luck had it, I ended up down in Coos Bay on the Cutter Citrus, and so I was able to sneak away the first year and get quite a bit of fish, more fishing I ever thought I would. Just kind of was able to take some leave and got a few more days off than I thought I would, and I was just bombing up and down Highway 101. And every time moment I had off, I'd go fishing, and the crew members thought it was crazy. I'm like, you're on the water all the time. Why did you want to go out back out in the ocean? Go do something else. No, that's what I do. But so I was going back and forth there, and the Zodiac up there was part of that. And did a little boat driving toward the end before I left the ship to go to school. And then got reassigned to Southeast Texas, a long way away, intercoastal waterway area where we responded to oil spills. There were a lot of refineries and things there, so that's what we did. And so I was able to take a little leave and get home in the summer and get my fix, and then and so I was, there's a picture of me fishing probably in '83 right there when I was able to come home. But by '84, 1984, I was still in the Coast Guard. Keep doing that. There we go. And those years were not good for salmon fishing. Um, the seasons were restricted and so forth. So we actually Dad didn't want to even put the boat in '84. It really was so restricted. He just didn't think it was profitable. And so in '85 was the same. So by that time by '85, I'd met Deanne. And so I was working on the back of a commercial fish crabbing boat, 44 footer out of Newport. And so I was doing deckhanding. I didn't know the future of the dory fishing. And so that was that boat right back there in the background. I don't have a good old picture of that, but she took that of me kayaking by it one day. And so there weren't many boats fishing for salmon, but by then I got out of the Coast Guard and working on the back deck of the boat and doing the crabbing and halibut and albacore tuna and stuff. And then I met Deanne. So it was a real big transition time there. And that left me a lot really wondering what the future of the trolling was going to be. And still had the boat and all that, and still waiting, kind of see how that shook out. And that was kind of a big change. And we were getting to know each other. She was in Corvallis, and I was driving back and forth. And so life is changing for the better. And then even got better. And so by 1986, seasons popped up again. And so I was on the crab boat, and season was winding down, and I said, I told the guy, I really want to get my boat going again. So I want to salmon fish again. So I had taken really good notes on all these, while I was with on the bigger boat, and I got in on all this. He would kind of go around on all these top fishing boats, and I got to hear their gear. So I'd write it all down when I got home. Yeah. And so and I employed all that gear and started fishing, and Dad was transitioning to another job, and with heating, air conditioning sales that he had. And so he was kind of part-time. So I was kind of, by then had reversed roles. So anyhow, by 1986, I was starting to fish a lot solo, met Deanne. So we're, continuing that part of our relationship. And then the fishing really took off and was really awesome. And so we got in some really good seasons. And then we got married in 1987. And so we had to experience I'm going fishing in the summer and I won't be home, as much, but we worked it out. So she would drive over a lot back and forth, and we still got to see each other and made that work. But the fishing was fabulous. See, I kind of, sometimes the glory years of our trolling, and it was really good for Chinook and coho fishing, and it looked like it was back forever. It's just awesome. And Dad came over when he could, and we had some great experiences there. And I took the boat down to Florence and fished. There's the book that kind of describes my first trip down to Florence, which was kind of scary, but did that, and down to Reedsport, and just was a whole nother world of opening up of opportunities. And like I said, the fishing was really good, and it looked like, dreams were coming true on that end of things. So, and then I went back to school too. I had a deckhand I worked with, and he was going back. He had broached the idea, I'm going back to school to be an elementary teacher at U of O. And then another guy was going back to George Fox, and he was a dory fisherman doing that. And I thought, that kind of sounds like a good idea, came together and talked to Deanna about that. And my mom, she kind of encouraged me to. And so I ended up doing that. That was my trajectory. And I thought, okay, this is a good path. And then, so things went well there. And then 1989, the season started off great. And then the price went down and the fishing went downhill. And by August of that summer, I was working for a painting contractor in Albany, doing something I didn't imagine I would be doing during the summer instead of dory fishing. And so things were kind of on the decline a bit. And then things got really restricted. We were still able to do it and kind of make it meet by 1990 and then 91. And 91 was the last year I fished. I did have another big fish story that's in here, even bigger than the last one. That was pretty cool. But that was the last year I actually fished. We had 1992 rolled around. My oldest daughter was born that year. In teaching, you get into master's courses and things. So those things start popping up and having to navigate that. And then the fishing season was next to nothing that year. And so I thought, well, wait this out. This is probably a good year to wait it out. And then, maybe next year we'll do it. And, by 1995, 96, 97 rolled around, and we're kind of like, what do we do with the boat? And it was not going to continue. It wasn't viable anymore. And we ended up selling the boat, which was really, that was a hard thing to do. And so, that was the end of my fishing career at that point. And really missed the water. We had other life going on with the daughters and stuff, and fabulous and all sorts of new adventures. But I always missed the water, and so that's where the kayaking comes in. I read about that a little bit too, and in the last chapter of just reuniting with the salt water and what that meant. But so this book has just been really cool. Of like I said, I connected with some authors. There was an author I connected with. I just wanted to find a publisher, and she actually, her late husband had connections to the person we bought the boat with, and that she mentioned a certain publisher from Newport I get a hold of who had moved to Bend. And long story short, so I'm working with Dancing Moon Press next after 2 years. I kind of hit that point where I was like, I wrote it and I go, if I self-publish this, it would be full of errors, and all people would, say, "Oh, you made a lot of mistakes in this book and stuff." If I had a review, so I was like, I don't want to do that. So that's where I connected. I needed a publisher, somebody to guide me the rest of the way, and she really helped shape that book and help it come alive way more than what it was in the first major draft after 2 years. And so that's where it really took shape. And then so it was about a little over a year ago we finally got it out and published, and so that was really exciting. And then all of a sudden you go, okay, now what? It's like, okay, I got a book out there, how do I get it out there and promote it? And that's been just a lot of research and trying to talk to people, and a lot of face-to-face, and like opportunities like this are tremendous, and appreciate it beyond words. But so I've done some book signings, and then just the connections, like a book signing down in Pacific City we did this summer. People came out of the woodwork, and there's just all these connections to the past and present, and we'll go into it. It was kind of mind blowing, and and even a former student from years past just popped up out of the blue. Never really have a connection to fishing, but it's like, where did you come from? It's just like, wow, how imagine seeing you here, and so anyhow, that's just been a real rewarding endeavor, just being able to do that. Yeah. So I don't know. Any questions? Anything that can come up? Yeah.
Did you wear a life jacket?
Did I wear a life jacket? I do now on my kayak. Back then, we had a few times. back then it was big and bulky and it was really hard to run, crank the gear. Not a very good excuse, but I wish they had the nice, real inflatable jackets, the ones that would have been more, should have, absolutely. But back then we just didn't. It is a requirement on my kayak now at all times, no matter where and when. So that's changed. But at the time, no, we did not.
I see this the young one thinking, I will live forever.
What could happen?
What
You
could
know, I
happen?
mean,
It's like,
yeah. Yeah, but now, kayaking it's a requirement. Don't leave without it. But, yeah.
I loved how you talked about your dad and your dad mentoring you, and it sounds like he was just really, I say was, you never said if he's still
Yeah, and I just I
around and
mentioned he passed away in 2016. Yeah, so and that's this
Yeah.
book is really that was my big motivation to really get on with writing it is to just honor him, I guess.
And it
To do
sounds like
this.
he knew when to be kind of tough and how to be optimistic and how to be your mentor and then switch places. I mean, that's
Yeah,
all just really beautiful to hear about.
Thank you. He was always very excitable. Yeah. And it was always, sometimes I kind of get down. Yeah, no, boy, we're gonna get them a little later on. Like, okay, well, but and there were a few times we almost kind of got into it one time. So that was over fishing gear and where to fish, and it was just a clash. It was kind of coming over a number of times, and then that passed. That was other than that, we got along great, and it was just the best of times. I feel so fortunate, and I appreciate what he did. I don't know what life would be like without having all those experience on the water. It just kind of wove into so many other things I've done that got to do and experiences. And yeah. So yeah, it's really cool.
So if your mother and your wife must be very supportive of all the fishing.
Yeah, it was interesting. Deanne at first wasn't sure, I think, about, if how that was going to when we first met, because I was out overnight and stuff like that, and if I was going to continue doing that. But over time, I did, eventually I went back to school. I wasn't going to do that, so it was just day fishing, and so it was just a transition into that. But yeah, just the safety element of it, I think it's probably a concern. My mom, it's just when you're young, you just don't think of stuff like that until later. I was thinking back later, I go, gosh, you must have been worried, but when you're young, you think, mom's worried, really? Why would you do that? But later on, I really thought about that, especially once I dove into this. Yeah, wow, that's quite a thing for her to impressed my dad a lot.
Yeah.
Dad always said, I have to bring you back. Yeah. So there was, when we got into nasty weather and stuff, I cannot come home without you. So, yes.
Has your fishing experience informed how you approach your STEM teaching?
Yeah.
By the way,
Especially.
thank you for being a male.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a great journey. Especially where I used to be when I was a classroom teacher, we used to got into raising salmon in the class and hatching salmon and releasing them, and we expanded that. That was really cool. We had a program that, slowly every year we'd add an element with my teaching partners. So we had a really cool program going, and I think they're still doing that there, and that's continued on, which is really rewarding to know that it keeps going. It doesn't stop. It's just I stop, but I don't do that anymore. It just doesn't fit the. It's kind of like a music PE teacher, and I got 500 kids coming through me, so I can't quite do it the same. But it's kind of like I refer to it a lot in just odd little ways, and I'll bring it up. I brought it up to kids the other day. We were just even talking about sound and echolocation with first graders and first grade class. And then, so I like to tell stories. So it was a great opportunity to launch into a story and get off track. Well, I was on track, but a little bit, but purposely a little off. Just, I like to do that. But yeah, so yeah, it's definitely woven in. There's been all sorts of ways, especially with the salmon program, that we used to do.
Did the Chinook you raised know about what you did to their ancestors?
We didn't talk much about that. Yeah. They were just grateful that I released them. So. Yes, sir.
In the list of people who are fishing, you also listed foreigners or foreign boats, I guess. And who are you referring to?
Oh, the foreign trawlers?
Yes.
I think they were Polish and Russian, and there used to be offshore. We see these big fishing boat, these factory boats, and they were just offshore. And there's been a lot of criticism because you'd see sometimes fish with net marks and things like that, and they drag these huge nets, and they're just these big kind of steampunk vessels that were just hauling back. And you know what? They were offshore a little further, but you definitely wanted to stay out of their way. And so
Was this in the 70s or 80s?
that was 70s and 80s. The last one, I remember in early 90s seeing a few of them down in Florence. That's the last memory I have of seeing those go by. I think it was early 90s. And yeah, they were, I heard stories of people that got tangled up with them. Yeah.
So the decline in fishing you're talking about, is this a result of this massive overfishing and or the decline of salmon runs?
Well, that, a lot of people think that contributed to, certainly, there was a lot. And I used in the Coast Guard, we would have, I didn't do the boarding. I was very new in the Coast Guard, so I was lowering the boats, but for the most part. But we'd send officers over there, and sometimes there'd be illegal catch of salmon on some of the foreign fleet. They would inspect them really thoroughly, and so keeping a close eye on that. I always wondered, there weren't very many tuna caught back then compared to there are now, and you just had to wonder if that had something to do with it offshore. There just wasn't as much regulation on that. I haven't really, read up on it specifically, but I don't think those boats are there anymore. So there must be some regulation on it. But yeah, it was definitely something to watch out for too, safety wise, especially in the fog. And, yeah. One of the guys that fished, he was on a red boat that I showed earlier up there with the other guys, and he used to be he'd go over and do a lot of interpreting and stuff on that. That was one of his other jobs. Yeah.
The difference between a trawler, TROLLER, and a trawler, TRAWLER.
The one with the A is with nets, and it depends, there's different, like bottom fish, usually other, rockfish, cod, and things like that they'll crawl the bottom for, with nets. And then a troller is just trolling like lures, if the O would be that. So sometimes it gets mixed up. It was interesting. We just lived in Salem, but it was so hard to, and I read about this a little bit, but it's so hard to communicate what we did. And it's only, hour and a half away, and it's like, we go home and they go, oh, you use nets. No. Well, then you use a fishing rod. No. And then it just got so frustrating. I didn't want to explain it. And I almost didn't want to talk about it because, I'm like, it's not like I went home to Kansas. It's just Salem, It's like, you should be able to get this, and it was like, and, but, it was just such a different world, even. And it was really, that was a frustration for me going to back to school. I really didn't enjoy going back to school. I had this summer of just this paradise summer, and I was totally into the culture of it all, and to blast back into that and then try it. No one understood. And, that was always my big conflict. And I wasn't really excited about academics at that point, just because I would rather keep doing the fishing rather than going back. So that was a little bit of a challenge as a teenager, to try to navigate that.
Well, Terry's book is over in our main room and ready for signing and buying. So if you feel so inclined, we'll be glad to sign books and to sell them. And if you can't do it today, there will be some books available at the Cannon Beach Book Company as well.
Yeah. So thank you very much for coming and for the time. And got a lot of choices to do other things, so it means a lot. So
Coming in. Terry.
yeah, thanks.
And the.
You're not being frustrated, not being noticeably frustrated.